So somewhat recently, I played Mario Kart Wii on an actual steering wheel, and it was interesting to say the least.
You know what? I am not getting 12th at least. You know, really? Oh, you are kidding me. You are... Oh my god. Okay. Wait. The half pipes might... that might be a lie. This is... Don't you dare spit me out in this corner. I knew... And I was ready for it. Oh, I'm going off... What the f...
But I was wondering how I could take that one step further, and after a short think, I figured it out. So today I present to you beating Super Mario World with a steering wheel. The concept is very simple. I move Mario with the wheel and do pretty much everything else with my pedals. There is an ever so slight issue with that, however. Think about the pedals in an actual car, specifically the clutch. When you push the clutch down, no power is going to the engine, which means you're at a standstill. But when you take your foot off of the clutch, provided your car's in good nick, the car will start to move forwards. That's essentially what I've got going on here. When my pedals are down, there's just nothing going on. But when I took my foot off of the pedal, that's when the button gets pressed in the mind of Dolphin Emulator. I mean, my totally legitimate Super Nintendo Entertainment System that I've got a steering wheel hooked up to. So essentially, to jump, I've got to put my foot down and back up again, which will be a hell of a lot of fun. This also means that I will be running at all times unless I put my foot down on that clutch. So, that ought to be fun. With that in mind, the plan is to take the Star Road route in order to get to Bowser as quickly as possible. This way you get a mix of some easier levels and some more challenging ones. So, without further ado, I've put on the Mario onesie once again, and I find myself in Dinosaur Land. The obvious first thing to do was go to the first level in the game, which is Yoshi's Island 2, because all my homies hate Yoshi's Island 1. What's even over there? Yellow Switch Palace? Who needs that? As soon as I loaded in, I spent a little bit of time getting used to the controls and discovered my biggest weakness: latency. I don't think I mentioned how scuffed this setup is, because it's very scuffed. There's horrible latency on the wheel, the thresholds are awful, I have to turn the wheel at least 90 degrees before Mario even starts to move, and there was this cursed headphone wire in the way the entire time. Anyway, Yoshi's Island 2 was actually quite painless. We were able to get Yoshi and then stumbled through the level and beat it on my first attempt. Well, it's not my best performance, but I'm sure it probably is my worst performance, actually. Maybe this isn't gonna be as bad as I thought. Yoshi's Island 3 is up next, and remember that thing I said about 3 seconds ago? Maybe this isn't gonna be as bad as I thought. Let's just... much better. I started this level off by elegantly climbing up this stack of whatever this is, and then instantly walking off the edge. I didn't fancy jumping, I walked off. This made me realize how much a struggle movement was actually going to be. I was really not finding it easy at all to align my jumps, and in a platformer, this is not ideal. And even if I could align my jumps, I was also struggling with actually using the pedals because of the whole thing we spoke about earlier. So, remember that thing I said about all my homies hate Yoshi's Island 1? What's even over there? Yellow Switch Palace? Who needs that? Upon further inspection, I've decided that the yellow blocks from the Yellow Switch Palace might be a little bit helpful.
Which means that we have to complete another level. And if I can't beat this one...
Well, if that wasn't indication enough, I struggled a lot with Yoshi's Island 1. The biggest challenge for me in this level was the bonsai bills. I died to these guys so many times, and when I didn't die to these guys, I was making silly mistakes like jumping directly into pits. This level threw me off so much that I got a game over on the first level of the game. Thankfully, after restarting, I only died one more time, and after a very long time, I was able to beat Yoshi's Island 1. Which meant that the Yellow Switch Palace was now unlocked. I was able to get a 1-up from all of the coins in the palace, and then after a bit of difficulty, jumped on the switch and turned on the yellow blocks. I obviously had to replay Yoshi's Island 2 because I got a game over, but luckily this level is an absolute breeze. I was able to do it first try with no loss of lives. Now that we're back to Yoshi's Island 3, the yellow blocks are making it so much easier. Although I am still I fell down this gap right at the start at least 3 times, and I am very embarrassed about it. I managed to get past the first gap after about 10 minutes, which was a big achievement, and then I collected Yoshi and instantly threw us off the level. This is the hardest level yet by far due to all of the precise jumps I need to make in succession. And I'm not sure whether you've clocked it or not yet, but precision isn't exactly my thing when I'm playing like this. So much so that I managed to get my second game over. And this also means that I had to replay Yoshi's Island 2. But after replaying Yoshi's Island 2, I was back at it, and finally I was able to beat the level. And I kid you not, this probably took about 40 minutes to beat. It sucked. It really sucked. Within 5 seconds of starting Yoshi's Island 4, I got absolutely sniped by a fish. I was worried about Yoshi's Island 4 going into it, because I have small platforms where I need to perform precise jumps, and there's the constant threat of both the sea mines and Cheep Cheeps, which are going to be difficult for me to avoid. I decided primarily to spin jump through the level. That way, even if I did land on a sea mine, I'd just bounce right off of it. However, this doesn't exactly work when you take a sea mine to the face. Thankfully, my nerves were quickly put at ease because Yoshi's Island 4 was not challenging at all. I managed to get through in 3 attempts, which was a lovely break from the torture I just had in Yoshi's Island 3. And now it is time for Iggy's Castle. Now, this actually wasn't too bad. A lot of the level is kind of avoidable with the climbing grates. Climbing was a bit weird. I have a D-pad on the steering wheel which I use for my up and down, just in case you were wondering. Trying to steer whilst using the D-pad to go up and down was a bit tricky at times and it caused me a death. But overall, the level wasn't too bad. The most difficult part of the level for me was the crushing pillars, which I did die to a couple of times and also fell into a pit. You may have never thought you'd hear this in your life, but the Iggy boss fight was very difficult. Without a fire flower, I was restricted to only being able to jump on his head, and now this requires a lot of precision. I don't know if you watched the rest of if you just decided to tune into the video at this specific point, then you've missed quite a bit, hello, and you would know that I am not very good with these precision jumps. Eventually, I was able to take him out, and now it is time to move on to Donut Land. Donut Plains 1 introduces us to the Cape Feather, which is going to be essential for us. So the first thing I did was miss getting the cape and instantly die to a Koopa. However, on my second attempt, I did actually manage to get the cape, but flying was very difficult. The issue I'm faced with is that where my buttons are constantly being pressed down, I am forced to glide whenever I jump, which surprisingly isn't very useful. Every attempt I was making it to the exact same point after not being able to fly properly and then dying in that spot. However, eventually I was finally able to make it to a checkpoint. There's a secret exit in Donut Plains 1 that I'm trying to get to. You need to fly up through some pipes and use a key to get to the secret levels, which takes us to Star Road. I managed to earn myself a game over, which sucked. Luckily, where we've beaten Iggy now, it saved me in Donut Plains, so I can get straight back into the level. But it means I do have to go back to the very beginning and lose my checkpoint. I managed to make it back to where I was, but getting into the secret exit was very, very difficult for me. Normally it's as easy as just flying up in there, but on a steering wheel, it's not as easy as that. I'd been at it so long, I started to overheat in the onesie, and unfortunately, it had to come off for the second half. However, after over an hour, I was finally able to get into the secret exit and beat Donut Plains 1.
Oh my god!
I was going into Donut Secret 1 on 1 life, and I was dreading it due to the water. I thought that swimming was going to be impossible to manage on the steering wheel. However, it was nowhere near as bad as I thought. I did die at one point, but I figured out that pressing the brake pedal rather than the accelerator, which is currently my spin jump, is a lot easier for swimming because you have to press the pedal a lot less. I was able to get through Donut Secret 1 on my second attempt, which was fantastic. And I was extremely relieved because I could have got a game over and had to do Donut Plains 1 all over again. After the fear of only having 1 life set in, I went back to Yoshi's Island 2 to farm some 1-ups just by picking up the Koopa shell at the start and kicking this line of Koopas and then exiting the level. With a nice stack of lives, I decided to move on to Donut's Secret House. This is one of the many ghost houses in the game. However, you wouldn't get to this one unless you're taking the secret Star World road. The level itself was fairly easy, but it does require landing on a P-switch, and this was actually very tricky for me due to not being very precise in my jumps. After a death, I went back to Donut Plains 1 to collect a cape from the start of the level, exited and went back to Donut Secret House again, where I was able to make it to the boss and then beat the boss first try. This means that I'm moving on to Star World. Star World 1 was a complete breeze. This level is impossible to lose. There's no enemies and you just have to spin jump in a straight line. I was able to do it first try. Star World 2, we got the purple Yoshi, who is incredibly helpful, which you'll find out about in just a moment. Towards the end of the level, I accidentally jumped off the back of Yoshi because I pressed down the brake pedal to swim rather than the accelerator, which, as I mentioned before, is my spin jump, which means I jumped off of Yoshi. But I was able to save it and beat the level first try again. Star Wars 3 was actually quite tough due to this P-switch. As I've mentioned many times at this point, precision jumps are not my forte. And also, I kept making myself fall by picking up the blocks underneath me to throw at Lakitu. I had to go back to Star World 2 to collect Purple Yoshi again, and then I was able to beat Star World 3. I decided to grab a cape from Donut Plains 1 again so I could use it to glide when I jump, because Star World 4 requires a lot of precise platforming. Straight away, I lost Yoshi and had to restart the level. The reason I want this purple Yoshi is because when he holds a shell in his mouth, he gains wings, which I can use to fly, and it is necessary to get to the secret exit on Star World 4. Star World 4 was very difficult. I kept dying from missing jumps or had to restart because of losing Yoshi. Luckily, there's a 1-up right at the start of the level, so there was no risk of game over at any point. Having the additional risk of being able to lose Yoshi and that ruining my run rather than death is also an added challenge. I cannot get hit throughout this entire level, otherwise Yoshi is going to run off the edge and I've got to restart. I was finally able to make it to the secret area, but when I spat out the shell to get the coin, I lost Yoshi. However, I was still able to beat Star World 4, and unfortunately for him, Yoshi doesn't matter too much because next up is Bowser's Castle. On my first attempt, I was kind of guessing which doors to go through. I hadn't really thought previously about which way to go for it to be easiest for me. In the end, I decided to go through door 3, which is the Mecha Koopa Maze. This section was not difficult at all. I was able to get through it with no difficulty. For the second set of doors, I went through door number 8, which is this corridor filled with charging chucks. I was able to bounce off of the heads of all of the charging chucks and easily glide to the end. Although, I did take damage here. After the doors, we get a little bit of a castle level, which I died at to a ninja. On my second attempt, pretty much the same thing happened. I was able to make it through the doors fairly easily, but died in the castle section again. However, on my third attempt, I finally made it to Bowser. And this fight is a lot tougher than I had anticipated it to be. It was incredibly difficult to land on the Mecha Koopas and even to throw them at Bowser. I spent so many attempts on Bowser and I wasn't seeming to get anywhere with any of the attempts. Until I finally managed to get to the third stage of the fight. And then died. At this point it was starting to get to me a little bit. I had been at this boss fight for already over an hour and I was getting frustrated. But after pushing through it and a couple more attempts, I was finally able to deliver the final hit and beat Super Mario World playing on a steering wheel.